For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grubner Gaddis, and this is Rooted. Hello, and welcome back to another week of Rooted. This week, we're talking about a tree that might just be as interesting in fact as it is in fiction, dragon's blood. The dragon's blood tree, or Dracaena cinnabari, is native to the Socotra archipelago of Yemen, an area known for its biodiversity and unique species. The dragon's blood tree is kind of a weirdo, though, even on an island of misfits. It has a long, thick, smooth trunk and a very densely packed canopy. It really is about as close to an umbrella as a tree can get, with its crooked branches basically touching and its evergreen leaves only growing at the very tips of its new growth. And while it might sound bizarre, this is actually a very useful adaptation for these plants, which grow on the tops of mountains in very thin, poor soil, getting very little water or relief from the constant beating sun. So, having this dense canopy and as few leaves as possible helps to keep the trunk and soil below shaded, while also preventing as much evaporation as possible. Dragon's blood trees also put on flowers, usually around March, which then become greenish berries that turn black as they age, and then to orange when they're ripe. And those berries each have about 1 to 4 seeds, which are typically distributed by the various birds that call these trees home. This is also a super handy feature for them, since the older trees support the seedlings by giving them a much needed support in their early years. And speaking of growing, all arborist members of the Dracaena family have a sort of weird way of doing things. Their leaves and new growth happen only at the end of their branches, and they shed all of their leaves every 3 to 4 years, which is very abnormal for evergreens, especially monocot evergreens. Typically, leaf shed is a little bit more of like an annual or not at all situation. And because of this, the dragon blood tree does almost have growth rings, though they can't be used to reliably determine the tree's age. And while that might not seem like a super big deal, it does make it really hard to track the tree populations and accurately estimate how long it takes one of these trees to grow from seedling to maturity, which is more relevant than ever due to climate change. Dragon's blood doesn't just look like an umbrella. It's also a literal umbrella species, meaning that it plays a critical role in supporting other species like birds and rodents that call this tree their home, and other animals and plants that benefit from the shade they provide. As an umbrella species and symbol of a nation, the effects of climate change on dragon's blood trees are well documented, and a massive consideration for how we react to impending change. Currently, the biggest issue for them is that change in weather. This plant typically relied on infrequent but steady rainfall without super high winds. However, due to a change in temperature and wind patterns, these trees are now subjected to intense periods of high winds and heavy rains that snap mature trees, followed by an intense drought and heat, which kills off saplings that no longer have the support of mature trees. Another struggle for this guy is goats. The goats that live on this archipelago have an insatiable appetite and will eat pretty much whatever they want, including the young dragon's blood saplings that somehow do manage to weather the storms. This is especially concerning because while we don't know exactly how long it takes for these bad boys to grow, we know that it's a pretty long time. Like probably 100 years or so before they can really provide shade or do much of anything. And without a middle generation started, scientists are worried about the future of not just this species, but the health of most species native to this archipelago. Obviously, it's a bit of a bummer. But the good news is that we're working on it, and we have really smart people who are thinking about this problem every day and working really hard to find the best solution possible. Now, this whole time, you've probably been sitting in suspense, wondering why do they call this thing a dragon's blood tree? And, well, it's because they actually bleed. I mean, I guess technically all trees kind of bleed, like that's what sap is, but these trees have red sap that really looks like blood. It's honestly kind of freaky. And this sap is red due to 5 distinct flavonoids, which are the same flavonoids that are responsible for vibrant fall leaves and even some of the coloring in our blood. This blood is obviously what got this tree on the map, with plenty of folklore and pharmacology for us to dig into. According to Greek mythology, there was a vicious serpent-like dragon named Ladon. Not to be mistaken for Landon, the kid we all somehow had in first grade that was absolutely a biter. Ladon honestly had similar vibes, but it's like a little bit scarier. He had 100 heads and lived twisted around a tree in the Garden of Hesperides, guarding the golden apples. The dragon was sent by Hera, queen of the gods, to protect the sacred fruit that she had offered as a gift to Zeus, her no-good scoundrel of a husband, who honestly did not appreciate this woman enough. Anyway, after a whole lot of affairs and fights, Zeus's son, the strong, hot-headed Hercules, was sent to engage in the dangerous and difficult tasks, essentially the 12 labors he had to do to earn respect and become a god, which is quite literally the rising action of Disney's Hercules, and the 11th task called upon him to steal the apples of Hesperides with a fierce dragon standing guard. Hercules, wanting to win the approval of his good-for-nothing dad, sliced off the head of the dragon, and his blood flowed out all over the land, sprouting dragon's blood trees that we all know today. And the dragon was placed among the stars by the gods as the constellation Draco, and the dragon's trees, with their long, slender, and succulent-like trunks, had prickly leaves that continued to bleed, honoring the death of the dragon, with a reddish, oozing sap whenever they get cut. And you know what? Good for him. He deserved better. Rest in peace, Ladon. You would have loved Charlie XCX. Meanwhile, in Yemen, they have a bit of a different tale, but the outcome is about the same. In this tale, 2 brothers, or a dragon and an elephant, depending on who you ask, get into a huge fight. It starts with just name-calling and insults, but quickly turns to punching, kicking, and stabbing. You know, sibling stuff. And eventually one of them gets so angry that he accidentally kills his brother. Immediately filled with regret, he weeps and asks the fates to reverse his actions. While they can't necessarily do that, they do send trees down that spring forth out of the brother's tears, holding his blood as a reminder of what can happen when we choose anger and spite. In the dragon version, it's just kind of an epic beastie battle, where the dragon does win, but the elephant gets a few good hits in, and the dragon's blood, being magical, creates trees. Interestingly, it is commonly believed that this rendition of the story may have come in a little bit later, in support of the theories of alchemy and other magics that claimed dragon's blood was magic and capable of honestly some kind of wild stuff. Most notably, it was said that in order for spells and incantations to be their most powerful, they should first be written out in dragon's blood. Of course, I know what you're thinking. How were people just getting their dirty little hands on this? And did they really believe it came from dragons? And the short answer is yes, because there were absolute scoundrels out there calling themselves dragon slayers, and they would sell this crystallized sap to merchants, telling them that they had harvested it themselves off of their blades. And honestly, at the time it was kind of hard to call them out, because they would all just collectively tell people that there were dragons, and they just lived on coastal islands and left people alone because they were either banished from the mainlands or just didn't like people. Which is really wild when you think about the fact that explorers really hated each other most of the time, but the tie that bound them was literally gaslighting the general public about dragons. Like, yes, bro, I saw those too, bro. They were so big and so scary, and you were just so brave. I saw one breathing fire on our last expedition, and it was a wonder we got out alive. Also, they stole my leg, and it was absolutely not scurvy, but instead a massive lizard with a hankering for my limbs specifically. Like, what were we on about, England? What are we doing? What do you mean we collectively got together to just, gaslight people about dragons of all things? Kind of nuts. And while you might have thought the spell writing was where its usefulness ends, you'd be wrong. For a moment there, they were putting dragon's blood on everything. People were using it as toothpaste, they were using it to dye clothing and stuff, it was being used as a varnish on super fancy Italian violins. People were obsessed, okay? It was having its pop culture moment. And one of the uses that really has stood the test of time is actually wound healing. Herbalists then and now basically made a slightly more goth Neosporin, mixing the powdered dragon's blood or an extraction of it into animal fat or another salve, and then applied that over wounds to aid in the healing process, where it ultimately helped the wound to heal much faster with less scarring. Mostly because it was way less likely to get infected. Today, we know this is effective because of a variety of polyphenols, most notably taspine, which is believed to stimulate chemotaxis for fibroblasts, which, in less technical terms, taspine is basically calling a round of Ubers to get fibroblasts to the wound site more quickly, and those fibroblasts basically sort of act like a needle, pulling collagen and tissue together to help close up the wound faster and shrink the surface area of the scab, making it easier for the body to really focus where it needs to. Today, dragon's blood trees and other members of the Dracaena family are popular as houseplants and in desert and drought-tolerant landscaping. So, if you happen upon a tree that looks a bit like it has a skinned knee, stop to say hello and really take a moment to reflect on all the ways that British dudes have had the audacity to do just about anything. That's where I'll leave you for this week, but I'll be back next week with more tall tales and true facts. See you then! Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. If you liked the show, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at rooted.pod. We're finally updating regularly on YouTube at rooted.podcast, and you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, merch, and so much more. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me. I'm Grebner Gaddis, edited by Kat Friend of Friend Diagram, and our theme music was written and produced by Eric Cluxon. Rooted is a Henbane Media LLC production.